So the question is moving escalator just a myth? Next slide. Now, in defense of myths are actually very important. In fact, I once had an argument with my wife's PhD supervisor in an airport about myths. And he pointed out how important myths were. And I learned one lesson there: never argue with a social scientist about their own subject. Okay? And a classic example of this is the United States. Because everyone knows of the United States as land of the free, home of the brave. You know, Thomas Jefferson came up with this idea that all men are created equal by God, but he is somebody who owned human beings. He was a slave owner, you know. So was George Washington and James Madison and all the people who wrote these lofty words. Next, please. But it's not just the United States which has had national myths that are important in the founding. This is an iconic picture of Mao Zedong at Tiananmen Square, 1949, where it said the people of China have stood up. And this is not an old picture. This picture actually came from 2021, from Global Times. So this is a recurring theme, as Ravi pointed out. Next slide. We have our own myths in Singapore. The idea that the Singapore dream means that anybody, if you work hard, you can become a superstar, you know, and it's codified through this strategy of meritocracy. Now, this cartoon has been circulated a lot, and the idea is that we don't give special treatment to anyone, we don't do any affirmative action, we just have the same test. And in this cartoon, you can see what happens. The guy says it's going to be fair to everyone, you just have to climb a tree. So you can imagine how the goldfish or the elephant is going to do on that kind of test. Next slide. So this is the escalator, and I was Googling for a picture of an escalator, and this one came up, and I thought it was just perfect. It was actually around 2020 when the initial travel restrictions were only on tourists coming in from Wuhan. So they had a picture of this tourist coming in with all his shopping, etc., and he's right in the front of the escalator, presumably in Changi Airport, with his trolley, so nobody can get past him. And right at the back is a Singaporean auntie cleaning at the back of the escalator. So I think that is the big problem with the escalator that Ravi kind of hinted at, which is that if you work based on this model, the guy at the front, he's not going to give way to let you come up. The auntie is going to find it super hard to try and overtake the tourists coming in from Wuhan. See? And not just Wuhan, I mean, this could be anywhere. This could be a tourist from New York or whatever it is. It just happens that this picture is from a guy coming in from Wuhan. Next slide. So in essence, what the escalator represents is this concept called trickle-down economics, which was popularized by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And the idea was that a rising tide lifts all boats. If you grow the whole economy, everybody will benefit. The rich will benefit, the poor will benefit. But this cartoon actually comes from the Financial Times, you know, which is like the daily bread of the neoliberal class. So it's really surprising that even the Financial Times recognizes that trickle-down economics just doesn't work. Because essentially what happens is that the people on the top, they get all the benefits, all the goodwill, and then you get to be the driver, the valet, or whatever it is, or the doctor cleaning their wound. Okay, next slide. So the counter-argument to that is that Singapore is a different form of trickle-down. It's not the US or UK, it's not Thatcher or Reagan, because we provide opportunities for upgrading, for skills future. And I think, you know, this movie, Xiao Hai Pupen, by Jack Neo, now I really don't like Jack Neo movies, they're full of product placements and everything like that, but this movie really hit home. Because for those of you who still remember, there were three little young boys who were in a class, and they were competing in a meritocratic system, so they all had to compete for the same exams, and if they did well, they would go to the future. They would have a bright future. One of them had no talent in studying, but he was a great artist. So he never did well in school, but eventually he helped solve the crime at the end of the thing because he could draw a picture of the crook. Then there was a competition between the other two. One of them was from a rich family. His parents got him tuition in every single subject. The other one was helping out in his father's noodle stall at the hawker center. And in the meritocratic world, it's equal. The guy who's spending all night in the hawker center versus the guy who's spending all night getting tuition with every other subject are apparently in the same field in a meritocratic world. And we know that that doesn't work. Next slide. So it's not just Jack Neo himself, but there's actually data from academics which shows that the IP and GEP programs in Singapore have an overrepresentation of people from high-income families. Next slide. There are many reasons for this. One of the reasons is actually access to nutrition. This is a medical reason. And it's been shown by a large cohort study of mother and child pairs. And what they find is deficient nutrition in the mother actually impacts on the cognitive performance of the children. And so when you have early streaming, when you have children who are tested at very early ages, if their parents don't have the best nutrition, then it's also going to have an impact on them. Next slide, please. But in Singapore, it's more than just that. It's actually related to the way the school system is structured. You all know that there's no streaming now, except in the IP, GEP, and SAP. So for the rest of us, there's no streaming. IP, GEP, SAP, there's plenty of streaming. And this actually listing of the most popular primary schools in Singapore, interestingly enough, comes from Property Guru. Okay, and Property Guru identified these schools, which happen to be located in Bukit Timah, Bishan, Central area, Ang Mo Kio, Clementi, Serangoon, one in Tampines, and in Marine Parade. And interestingly enough, of these schools, a significant number of them, close to half of them, do not offer all the three mother tongue languages. So de facto, you're segregated firstly by basis of income, and secondly by basis of mother tongue languages, and that is very unfortunate. And the third way that this so-called ability to climb up the ladder is hindered through upgrading is because of the cost of tuition. Now, you go and Google this and you can find there are tuition centers which guarantee you a slot in the GEP or DSA or whatever it is. And these all cost a pretty penny. Next slide. So, next please. So overall, there's actually close to $1 billion every year is spent on tuition in Singapore. So to me, there are two interpretations of this. Either it's a big scam, tuition centers are making money and the tuition doesn't really help you, or there's a huge gap in the mainstream education process. So parents realize that they need to spend $1 billion in order to get their children to get a chance to climb the social ladder. Next slide. And this is not just recognized by activists, by sort of left-wingers. Even the principal of RI made this comment. He said, "Our system of meritocracy is working less well than it used to in 2 generations. Families that have been successful financially have been able to create advantages for their children. The PSLE and other gatekeeping exams are no longer the level playing field that they once were." And I think any of you who are parents or have nieces and nephews know what we're talking about. You've got some kids, they get everything, they get all the 10-year series, they know how to answer the question, and then you get other kids who are struggling. And it's not just the children. This is a study called In-Work Poverty, done by NUS, and they've just recently published their data, which is actually accessible online. And what they found is very striking. The PAP constantly talks about, the government rather, constantly talks about training, upgrading, going for skills, future, and all this kind of thing. But when you talk to these young people, the proportion who actually attended training was only 35% for those with secondary education and below, 45% for those with ITE, but as high as 66% for those with degrees. And many reasons were given for them. Some of these training courses required a minimum O-level, they didn't accept N-levels. Some of these were held during hours when they were working night shifts, so it was not possible for them to attend. But this is even more striking, is that for those who were funded by their employers, for those with secondary level and below, it was only 78%, whereas for those with degrees and above, it was 92%. So even if you say that, okay, education, skills future, upgrading is a way to boost yourself, there are already even structural barriers with that. So I think that's a major concern. So education cannot effect change unless you find a way to get this guy's trolley out of the way so that people can move up and down the escalator. And you have to deal with the structural problems to allow this auntie to rise above where she is right now. And this is not new. This is actually a book written in 1939 where this guy American came to visit Singapore, and he described it as apart from Manhattan, the most important small island in the world in terms of its geographical position, commercial development, and strategic importance. And he pointed out how there was this fabulous British military base in Singapore, which he said cost about £16 million to build and £50 million to operate. But interestingly enough, where did this money come from? He said almost none of this money came from Britain. He said the money came from the Sultan of Johor, it came from the neighboring countries, but the bulk of the money actually came from the opium taxes. And so it was the coolies who were smoking opium sold by the British colonial government who paid the bulk of the cost of this. So that's kind of like the tradition in Singapore, is you squeeze the poor when you are concerned about trying to upgrade everybody. So it's different from the oil-rich countries. You dig in the ground, you get oil coming out, okay, so everybody benefits. This one, we don't have oil in the ground. What we do have is we have a pliant population, which is a big concern. So as Ravi pointed out, this moving escalator came in a talk that was given at IPS by DPM Tharman, and I actually asked him about this and commented on the health issue. And he said that it wasn't a single factor correlation. And to their credit, the government actually did a multi-factor regression analysis. And Leon Pereira, who's my friend from Marua days, he actually asked this question in Parliament. And next slide. Yeah, so that was the Tharman question. Next one. So Leon asked this question in Parliament, whether it was, what were the reasons for the difference in life expectancy. So basically what I showed was that I asked Tharman about the differences in life expectancy as a marker for income. And this study, which Minister Gan Kim Yong pointed out, was that when they did a multifactorial regression analysis using age, gender, ethnic group, and educational level, they still found that the poor were 1.7 times more likely to have diabetes, 1.2 times more likely to have hypertension, and 1.2 times more likely to have high cholesterol. Next slide. So this is the issue of health inequality, which is not unique to Singapore. It's actually been seen all over the world. Next slide. But in Singapore, it's particularly acute. This is from the Registry of Births and Deaths, and what you can see, again, using ethnic group as a surrogate marker for income level, the average age of death of a Malay Singaporean is 71 years. So if you collect your CPF at age 70, you've got 1.7 years to enjoy it. Compared to a Chinese Singaporean, it's 78.9 years. So you've got 8.9 years to enjoy the CPF you start collecting at age 70. Next slide. And this is actually a bit worse than it is in the US when they compare white Americans with black Americans. Next slide. But within Singapore, it's not just the ethnic group. It's within the ethnic groups you've got differences. And this is a study of high-income Malays and low-income Malays. And you can see there's a big difference already. It's a bit small, but there is a big difference in terms of their outcomes, in terms of complications and medical issues. Next slide. And it's not just income, it's also language. This is a publication from the Eye Center, Professor Wong Tian Yin, where he showed that Tamil-speaking Indians do worse than English-speaking Indians in terms of the complications of diabetes. Now this doesn't always have to be that way. Next slide. Because for many years, Singapore had very good healthcare. In fact, this is a WHO team who came to visit Singapore in 1960 to learn about our healthcare system. At that time, we had the $1 polyclinic. You went to and it wasn't a polyclinic, it was this OPD. You would go to the OPD around the corner, you pay $1 and you get whatever treatment and medication you needed. You needed to be hospitalized, you paid $5. And that was a standard. Okay, next slide. Unfortunately, all of that changed with Thatcher and Reagan and Singapore's adoption of the neoliberal model. And we have an incredibly kiasu financing model right now. This is from Singapore's MOH data. And you can see that the MediSave fund actually has in its reserve $110 billion. Every year they pay out $1 billion, but they keep $110 billion in case of a rainy day. Okay, that's some kind of super typhoon. Next slide. And the result of that is you've got Singaporeans who are getting indebted, not just because of overspending or job-related, but medical bills are actually right up there amongst the top causes of indebtedness among Singaporeans. Next slide. So I think, and this actually is not just the CPF issue. You know, with CareShield Life, everybody pays the same amount. Women pay more than men. The low-income Singaporeans who are going to die younger are also paying the same amount. So de facto, the low-income Singaporean is subsidizing a high-income Singaporean, in particular the women. Next slide. So we have a very unequal income distribution. Most countries have a sort of a bell-shaped distribution of income, where there's a large median and a mean, and then there's some people at the top and some people at the bottom. Singapore is a kind of U-shaped distribution, where we have a significant number at the bottom, and we have a huge number, like those people in Little Women, at the top, with very, very high incomes. And what has happened from 2011 to 2021 is, you can see, it is true, the escalator has moved up. So everybody's income has gone up. But the rate of increase is far higher for those at the top compared with those at the bottom or those in the middle. Next slide. So there is a better way. Professor Tommy Koh talked about this at another IPS event, where he pointed out that in Singapore, our cleaner's average income is $800. In Denmark, it's $5,500. In Finland, it's $2,000. Bus driver in Singapore, $1,800. Bus driver in Denmark, $6,100. In Finland, the bus driver is $3,009. So raising wages gives somebody a chance, to actually take on to at least compete in a fair, level playing field. Next slide. So I would argue that we need a change. We need to move from the escalator, where the guy with all the goodies can stand in front, block up everybody else from passing him, and the poor auntie is left thinking about how in the world she's going to move up. We need to move to this model. Now, this is a stair climber, and this is where it takes a lot of effort, but it gives somebody the chance to go upstairs. Somebody who is disabled, who would otherwise have no chance at all. It's costly, okay? But I think the benefit is great for everyone, not just for this individual. And the example I would use, next slide, is the EPL versus the NBA. Okay, now you all know there's only 5 clubs which can win the EPL. Okay, if it's not Manchester City, it's Liverpool, Arsenal, maybe Tottenham, and ancient history, Manchester United. Okay, but the NBA has got so many clubs which have won it, and the reason for that is deliberate. Because the way the NBA works is that they take the players from the colleges, and they have what's called the draft. So the first pick of the draft, in other words, the best player from the colleges, is chosen by the worst performing team in the NBA. So if you came in bottom of the league, you get to choose the best player from the colleges. So that ensures that there's been quite a bit of cycling. Golden State have won it quite a few times. That's clever managing. But in general, the number of teams that have won the NBA is far in excess of the number of teams which have won the EPL. In the EPL, you make money, you make more money, you can buy more players, you have some Arab godfather, contributing to you, and you buy the best players in the world. But that's not the way the NBA works. And the result of which is every NBA game is exciting. Okay, I know the EPL games between the top 5 are very exciting. Okay, other games 7-0. Who wants to watch that? See, and so I think that it's better for everyone to have a system where you give the losers a chance. See, the people who are behind get a chance to at least level the playing field moving up. And I think that's all I have to say.